Thanks for listening to The Dad Project. To help keep the podcast going, please consider donating at the link in the show notes or on our website, thedadprojectpodcast.org.
Few things are harder than the mission of raising your kids. At The Dad Project, we get experienced dads to reveal what's worked for them, offering practical, time-tested advice. Being a successful dad is tough, and we're here to help you get it done. Welcome to The Dad Project.
In this episode of The Dad Project, our contributor Josh speaks about the challenge and necessity of being consistent in our parenting and why it's so vital to our success. Josh is a law enforcement professional in Southern California. He and his wife have 4 children.
In 1982, Julie Moss, a then 23-year-old college student from California with no prior experience, decided on a whim to enter the Ironman Hawaii race, comprised of a grueling 2.4-mile ocean swim, 112-mile bike ride, and 26.2-mile run. Over the next 9 months, she trained sporadically while juggling school and waitressing jobs. The day of the race was a hot and humid one. Moss started strong, leading the women's field out of the water and powering through the bike leg. By the time of the run, she was in the lead. But dehydration and heat exhaustion began to take their toll around mile 17. Her body rebelled. Cramping seized her legs. Nausea hit hard. And every step became agony. Yet, Moss refused to quit. As darkness fell, she collapsed repeatedly, vomiting and crawling on all fours across the rough blacktop. Filled with determination and urged on by the crowds and fellow competitors, Moss dragged herself forward, inch by inch, for the final 6 miles. Spectators lined the streets in awe, cheering her name. In the end, she crossed the finish line in second place, just 17 seconds behind the winner. But the real victory was in her refusal to stop. Collapsing right after the line, Moss was rushed to the hospital, dehydrated and physically deteriorated, but alive, with the knowledge she'd conquered the impossible. Moss's efforts highlight the principle that the Ironman race, and more importantly, life itself, isn't always about speed. It's about grit, heart, and the will to keep going when everything screams to quit. As Moss would later go on to say, finishing is winning. What began in 1978 as a small competition, the Ironman series now has nearly 100,000 annual competitors. And while these events and the efforts made by the athletes are humanly impressive, I think there's a race of endurance far more important, demanding, and satisfying: parenthood. So let me ask you this question. What does it mean to be a parent? I think most people would agree that it's the process of raising and nurturing children from infancy to adulthood. It involves responsibilities like providing physical care, emotional support, education, and most importantly, fostering the development of their character. Okay, so my next question is this. When do we parent? If you're like many parents, you're probably thinking, dude, it never stops. Or, what are you talking about? I can never get a break. I'm always parenting. And I'd agree with you because I feel the same way. Maybe to your surprise, this, to me, is the single most important practical aspect of parenting. This seemingly restless task of always being on. And I'll concede, or better, I'll argue, that even for the best parents, being on all the time can and will wear us down and drive us to the point of wanting to check out. And it's precisely at this moment where we find our most tangible and readily accessible launch point for exercising and achieving greatness as parents and as dads in our consistency. What does that mean? Well, ask yourself, when are you most likely to give in to a demand of your child or your children that goes against your better judgment or the rules of the house? If you're like many parents, it's probably when you're exhausted, probably when you're stressed, probably when you're overwhelmed with other things, and you're at the point of not caring. Maybe you're like Julie Moss, crawling on all fours across the proverbial pavement. And this lapse in your parental standard, if it's seldom and doesn't involve serious behavior or character issues, maybe won't have a lasting negative effect on your kids. However, if it becomes, or worse, is already a systemic and frequent occurrence, I'm going to offer some suggestions on why and how to foster greater consistency in the parental formation of your kids. And by that, I mean we're consistent in the expectations that we hold for our children, and we're consistent in the correction of their behavior when they fall short of our expectations. So what is it about consistency that's so important? Why didn't I choose love or kindness or friendship as the most important practical aspect of parenting? The short answer is that consistency necessarily involves all of those virtues. And true love or real kindness or deep friendship necessitates consistency or perseverance in our behavior. Love one day and neglect the next isn't love at all. So let's get into the benefits of remaining consistent in our formative efforts with our kids. There's a robust body of research from the fields of developmental psychology, neuroscience, and public health demonstrating that stability in the home environment, which includes things such as predictable routines, secure parent-child relationships, and low household chaos, leads to better cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and physical development in children. You see, consistency gives our kids a sense of mental and moral cohesion and harmony. If we make demands on them one day and relent on those behavioral demands the next, it confuses them, and that instability has lasting effects on the development of their character and their sense of security. As we'll see later, this benefit's going to carry over into further dimensions. I'm going to highlight 3 areas where our consistency benefits their character development, but also benefits our personal relationships with them, and by extension, the overall well-being and harmony of the family. So first, when we're consistent, our kids more quickly learn to self-regulate. By that I mean, because the standard remains the same, without any competing or contradictory messaging, our kids can more quickly internalize and adopt the family behavioral standard without interruption. And that's a positive development in and of itself. However, in addition, behavioral self-regulation reduces our need to repeat ourselves, which I'll admit is a parental pastime favorite of ours. It reduces arguments with our kids or the tendencies to let things get out of control. And this has a further benefit of lowering levels of friction and stress at home. And this predictability builds trust, which enables our kids to have a steady platform from which they can launch out into the world. And this reduction of stress on our kids frees cognitive resources for moral and social learning rather than survival responses. Secondly, when we're consistent, aka we hold the line no matter how tired or stressed we are, our kids' long-term character development is more firmly established. Well, what does that mean, and how does that work? Well, I'll start by offering a negative proof to highlight the importance. Our kids, because they're human, just like us, will reflexively or instinctively take the path of least resistance, and we adults often do the same. When we lack consistency in parenting, we put before them the path of least resistance, that choice of deviation from the norm. Habituating them on a path of least resistance fosters their appetite for immediate gratification, and it inhibits their growth and appreciation for lasting values and hard-earned successes. They learn how to manipulate authority, behavioral norms, and adopt that as a mechanism for achieving their goals. I'm sure you've met people like this. By contrast, when we're consistent, our kids know that our values, and by extension their values, never take a vacation. We strive to live a standard of behavior in all circumstances, rain or shine. Raised in this environment, kids become accustomed to adhering to a standard, regulating their desires, making reasonable assessments, and persevering in denying themselves for a greater good. And there's robust research in this area that supports this assessment. For example, Harvard psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg found that children in stable environments with predictable rules are more likely to develop advanced moral reasoning by middle childhood. The cumulative effect of a stable home environment compounds over time, leading to lasting character benefits. Longitudinal data links childhood stability to adult outcomes like higher conscientiousness, better interpersonal relationships, and lower rates of antisocial behavior. The stability and consistency in moral decision-making we create at home becomes a permanent and stable character trait in our kids. And there are real and practical effects of this. One of the best returns on our investment is how our consistency pays off in the teenage years. I'm sure you've heard or maybe experienced the horror stories of sweet and lovable kids turning into monsters once they reach the teenage years. Well, I'm here to tell you that this is not an inevitability. While there is no magic formula to prevent all strife or friction with our teenagers, a significant safeguard against these difficulties is our consistency. As we've mentioned, our consistency helps our kids self-regulate, but it also forms in them the habit of knowing the rules and the sidelines of the playing field, and then giving them the freedom to act within those bounds. When they grow up accustomed to that practice, it's much less shocking or disruptive to their desire for independence in the teenage years when we hold them accountable and set before them rules of engagement. And it allows us to give them the freedom necessary for their maturity and development without the fear that they won't know how to manage it or the fear that they'll take advantage of us and our expectations. Thirdly, the lasting effects of a consistent moral framework are successes in personal endeavors and interpersonal relationships. As parents, we ultimately want our kids to be independent and self-sufficient, and at the same time, have confidence that they'll make sound decisions in their education, their friendships, marriages, careers, and someday in the rearing of their own children. Having discussed consistency in childhood and the teen years, we now consider adulthood. This is the time at which we still have desires and expectation for our children, but no longer have the influence and control we once did on their decisions. Few things are as heartbreaking and regrettable as seeing your young adult children make poor life decisions, watching in real time and not being able to make a remedy. The consistency we're considering here is in some way, again, a safeguard against these unfortunate possibilities. Adulthood is when we see the return on our investment in maintaining consistency in our expectations and our course correction of their behavior. The Great Wall of China was instrumental in greater or lesser degrees in protecting China against its adversaries. It took 2,300 years to build. It spans 5,500 miles and is comprised of approximately 4 billion bricks. Hopefully, it won't take 2,300 years for our kids' lives to show the fruits of our labor. But we can rest assured that these efforts we make day after day do and will eventually produce lasting results. As we've said before in this podcast, we want to be intentional about the rearing of our children and have the end goal in mind, namely that our kids become great wives and husbands, wonderful moms and dads, amazing friends, rock-solid colleagues, and generally happier people. Ultimately, in this crucible we call parenthood, we're striving to raise adults, not children. We want to experience the joy and satisfaction of seeing our children grow into people who are strong, responsible, and full of kindness. When we're consistent in our parenting and persevere in our personal Ironman race, we set our kids on the path to become strong men and women of character who will run and finish their race well.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Dad Project. If this talk was valuable to you, please go to our website at thedadprojectpodcast.org and make a voluntary one-time or recurring donation, or use the link in the show description below to help support our operations. Any amount helps. Catch you next time at The Dad Project.